As you know, I just returned from the 2023 International Bhikshuni Varsa, hosted, conceived, and sponsored by His Holiness Drikung Kagyu Kyabyang Chetsong Rinpoche, whose vision I think is just enormous in thinking of this and bringing nuns together. The very idea of having a Bhikshuni Varsa in some ways is so radical. Because where are there bhikshunis in the world? Not a lot of places. But by spending time with the nuns who attended this Varsa, I am extremely heartened by how much support there is growing and growing and growing for nuns throughout the Himalayan regions. And so I'll share a little bit about that, but there's more I want to talk about and think about with that, because they're planting, those nuns who took the Bhikshuni ordination last year in Bhutan, about 30 of them came for this Varsa. They are very, very aware that they are groundbreakers and that their practice will make a difference if they do it well and really embrace what it means to hold the full precepts of a fully ordained nun. They're ready to take it and go with it. And they were so eager to learn. It was just, I can't even tell you, and I probably get a little emotional, I apologize for that, but I can't tell you how gratifying it was to just think about how we here, Americans in the wild, 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 wild West, how in the heck did we ever not only become monastics, thanks to our kind teacher and all of her kind teachers too, but then not only that, but we had the connection with the nuns, the Chinese tradition where they've had the Dharma for the Bhikshunis have had the Dharma for 1700 years, who were able to bring it here and teach us. So to have the privilege to actually begin to share some of those same things that we've learned about how to enter the Varsa, how to do the Bhikshuni rites as they have been preserved in the Chinese tradition with these new nuns from the Himalayan tradition was so powerful and so moving and so challenging. And it's interesting, you know, Venerable Guoguang from Dharma Drum serves as abbess for the Arsa, which is still going on. And the two Taiwanese nuns she brought with her, Venerable Changhua, who was here in January for the course with Venerable Wuyan in 2018, was along. But even Dharma Drum doesn't do the rites in the way that we do them. The Chan tradition has kind of stripped down a lot of the ceremonies. So we were teaching even to them how to do the way we do confession, how we do posada, how we do entering Varsa, how we do even the inviting the teacher ceremony. So it was really very beautiful to be there. So there are about 130 nuns from Bhutan, Nepal, Vietnam, India, Taiwan, a handful of Western countries. There were only 5 Westerners, including 3 of us. So there was one person from Australia, one person, a German nun from New Zealand. Everybody else was from other Asian countries. This is the place, one view of the place. And at the very opening ceremony, Chetsong Rinpoche made a beautiful little video where he spoke about how you are the history makers, he said. You nuns who came here, who gathered here, are the history makers. This is the first time there's been a Varsa at this site near Sravasti in over 2,000 years. I don't know how they did the math on that, but anyway, a long time. And here everyone was, and it was very exciting. At the same time, Master Guogong brought us back to earth about what we were doing here in her opening speech, which I'd love to read, but it's a little bit too long. But she really said point blank, why did we come thousands of miles to be here? And then she talked about our robes, which is a story we've heard many times. The robe with squares that is like a rice field. And if the field is full of rocks and full of garbage, it's another analogy that Venerable has used many times, then nothing can grow. But on the other hand, if we strip the field of all the rocks and all the garbage, and the soil becomes nutritious, it will easily grow all the grain that we need. So she said, we've left home life, and our robe is like this field. this chugu has many patches, like the rice field. And by this robe, she said, we have become a field of merit. And those who make offerings also generate merit because of this choice. But she says, if we allowed afflictions to flourish, it will poison the field and destroy our merit. And if that happens when people come to offer food or make offerings to support us, they don't get very much merit from their gift. That's from the Chinese perspective. But she said it will be like a farmer planting seeds in poor soil, and will be hard for them to attain much merit. But if we practice diligently, cultivate our precepts, meditation, and wisdom, then this becomes a field that is nutritious. And not only is it beneficial for us, but for those people who have faith in the Dharma and are supporting the monastic Sangha, they too generate merit, much more merit, by offering to a field that's worthy of that merit, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it. She said there's a Chinese saying, as monastics, if we don't cultivate sila, concentration, and wisdom and subdue the 3 poisonous minds, in the next life, we will be reborn as an animal, like a cow or a pig, to pay back our donors by our labor or by having them eat our body. Now, this sounds very heavy. She said this is not to terrify us, but it is to remind us that the Buddha's teachings focus on causes and consequences, causes and effect. And so to hold in mind that it is not just our own practice, but for the benefit of others that we are cultivating, working diligently to overcome the afflictions in our own mind. So that really brought anybody's excitement about being in a new place, and new, real cool stuff. What is your job here is to see, when you see an affliction, throw it out like garbage on your land, concentrate your mind on your effort. And she says, if we can do this and make this internal land nutritious, both our donors and ourselves receive benefit. And if we do that, we won't be letting down wearing our chugu. So that was the strong advice with which we began this Varsa. And I found it pretty bracing, good advice. So let me see if I can do this reasonably without taking everybody's time. So when we first got there, our job, Venerable Damchu and I were a few days ahead of most people, so our job was to go around and check the boundary and put the food storage places in place and get as much done as we could before everybody came. This is the temple from afar, and this is where our first room was before we got flooded out. So here we are with the first session. This is when we're, So you can see Kemodroma is here in the center. She has been the holder and the keeper of this event since it was first proposed around 2019, 2018, something like that. And here is the huge Buddha that graces this really magnificently beautiful hall. It's just gorgeous to be in here. I couldn't tell how big this Buddha was compared to the one that will be in our Buddha hall, but I thought maybe kind of comparable. I'm not sure. Somebody will have to tell me. But I thought of our Buddha hall a lot as I was in this space. Here's the Bhutanese section. So we ended up having to sit by language groups. We started out in ordination order, but we had to sit by language groups in order to deal with the translation. Doing things in 5 languages. I mean, here are our kind translators. We had our 2 monks, and then we had our Vietnamese translator who just labored day and night, was the only non-translator. And at the beginning, everything had to be translated consecutively. So especially when Venerable Guoguang taught, she taught in Chinese, and then Venerable Changhua or Venerable Changsai put it into English, and then the Tibetan translator would translate it into Tibetan because the Bhutanese guy didn't really understand English so well. So then he would speak, once he heard the Tibetan, he could translate it into the Bhutanese, and the Vietnamese could speak both English and Tibetan, but she was struggling to get it done. So it was one language after another, and you can imagine that by the time they got to the 5th language, you'd almost forget what the topic was if you weren't paying attention, because it was hot, H-O-T, hot. Everyone is sweating buckets. So eventually, very kindly, there were enough transistor radios were procured to be able to cut this down by 2 steps anyway. They had made 4 different booklets for all of these in different languages, but not every language had all the books. So as we're teaching the rites and rituals, you have to figure out if you are Tibetan, then you only have the Shramaneri book, and if you are Vietnamese, you have almost no books, but if you can read English, you can get the whole set. So this was just a part of what people were doing to try to come together. And I don't want to focus on obstacles or the challenges, but I want to just talk about what an immense visionary project this was and what it took to make it work. And everybody worked because everybody wanted to make it work. Venerable Damcho, of course, is explaining here some aspect of the I don't know what, but she did a terrific job. I want to praise her to the skies, not just here, but in being able to teach the Dharma, relying totally on what Venerable Children has taught. But she was a marvelous teacher, telling the stories about the origin stories of the precepts. And, she's a good storyteller, right? So it was very, very captivating for people. She was great. So inviting the teacher, remember when Venerable Wu Yin was here, those of you who were here, we did the inviting the teacher ceremony. It's not something we do very often, but it was something we did then. So we got representatives from each of the language groups except the Vietnamese, who were the last to come, so they were too late to come to the rehearsals. But oh my goodness, what we had to switch. Like, everybody bows differently. The Chinese bow one way, the Vietnamese bow another way, the Himalayans bow another way. Are we going to bow to a bell? Well, so we easily, with Venerable Guoguang's permission, we easily went to one bell down, one bell up, bow how you do. It's okay. But everybody had to learn a half bow. So we all got very, very good at doing the half bow down and up. And at the same time, too, are we going to teach Namo Binsha Shuchai Moni Fo? I mean, 3 people speak Chinese. We are not going to, here's our half bow. They did quite well. We're not going to teach Namo Binsha Chuchai Moni Fo. So I ask, who's the umses? Who are the umses in the group? Who can do something like the Shakyamuni Buddha mantra while we're out going to get the teacher? So this nun, Jigme Trinley, opened her mouth. I will not even attempt to do what she said. She opened her mouth doing Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. I burst into tears. I do not lie. This woman's voice was so amazing. And her heart of offering her chanting as part of the Dharma was just stunning. So she led the Namo Binsha Shuchai Moni Fo chant. And then when we were circling the boundary, she sang Om Mani Padme Hum instead of the Chinese Great Compassionate Mantra. So, we were blending the traditions as much as we could. We taught the incense offering chant, which is very difficult to learn. And the last time I did a rehearsal, we hadn't done this at the beginning, the last time I rehearsed with him, so Venerable Seppel would have support. We had a room full of people, and I said, why don't you recite the words in Tibetan first, so we remember what this means. Well, the Tibetan tradition has a tune for almost any 4-line anything. So they didn't just recite it, they immediately started to chant this incense offering. It was stunning. So from now on, from the Posada starting this week until the end, first we will chant the incense offering in Tibetan, and then we will do it the way we do it. So we were doing our best to bring all these different traditions together as we could. You can see here this mix of traditions. Venerable Guoguang wanted, to bless the land with a branch of some sort. Well, there were no branches, but there was a bumpa vase, so let's do that. And she is a chant master, by the way, or was, and I suggested while she's here she might give us some tips. We'll see if that's possible. We all circumambulated the entire boundary together. And then Venerable Guoguang gave her talk on why are you here. This is when we were still in ordination order, so you can see that the Vietnamese were the senior nuns, principally. This empty seat is Venerable Changshai, who's up taking photos. And then the senior Bhikshunis among the Druk Amitabha nuns and the Bhutanese nuns were, 1 year into it. But they took that role as being the senior nuns because that's who we had being the men's attesters for their language groups. Here we are showing them how to do the stick thing, teaching the senior nuns how we do confession, so that in groups of 3, by language groups, the senior nuns became the people who were the amends attesters for the confession. And then, see, there's 130 some odd people, right? We were having to look at ways to streamline this process. So the entering Varsa, this is where, this is one of the senior Druk Amitabha nuns who's first with Venerable Guoguang, doing that entering Varsa statement, who's the master you rely on, la 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 la. But once the 10 were all established as having entered Varsa, they were all sent out into different seats around the room, and then people by language group went and did their, what is that called, Venerable? Their statement of entering Varsa, whatever, together. So this is a photo of how that looked. It's a room full of nuns kneeling before their seniors saying, yes, I commit to be doing this Varsa here. Here's a little bit of the facility. They've done a magnificent job, really. There's 2 wings. So this is one side. This is taking from one side. There's where I'm standing for this photograph. There's a wing exactly like it. They can sleep about 150 people, and the place was pretty well packed, between 130 nuns and close to 20 volunteers supporting this. And as you can see, everybody's having to do their laundry every single day because we are in cold water in the shower, right? Someone said, well, they do have washing machines in India. I said, give me a break. There were no geese, no turkeys, but there were resident geese who were saved from, being eaten and loved it when it rained. Oh my goodness, but these little geese are so spoiled. There's this enormous gong, not a conch, that called us to session, but when that gong is rung, it resonates throughout the entire property. And then once a week, the person who was the gonger switched. So doing discussion groups was part of what what the Abbey had to offer. And at the beginning, it was a little bit like, we don't really talk about these kinds of things. I realized that I had to really adjust my language when we did discussion questions, because things like, how does this strike you? Or when you hear the words, you have to do this, what stands out for you? It's like, huh? What do you mean? So we had to interpret this to start saying, oh, what did you learn from this? Something to make it really concrete, because to actually look inside and talk about your feelings, kind of alien, I think. But as we progressed, and at first people were quite shy about it, but quickly, nuns started to really enjoy doing it together by discussion, by language group. And then we had them report back. And at first, you'd wait a long time before somebody would raise their hand and stand up and share. But by the 3rd or 4th time, maybe by the 3rd time we did it, people were starting to stand up, and by the time I was leaving, they were really eager to stand up and share. Sometimes they would still whisper to the translator what their story was, and have the translator do the big talking. And we recruited nun translators. The Rinpoche had made arrangements for these 2 monks to come translate in Bhutanese and Tibetan, which was helpful and important. There were also times when people did not really want monks in the room. Some of the precepts were a little something we'd rather not have. And so we found tremendously skilled nuns among that group. This is the Bhutanese translator. She's very young. She works for or is a part of, is under the Bhutanese Nuns Association, but her English is superb. And she's a real leader. So this is one of the senior Bhutanese nuns who recently took the Bhikshuni ordination. And then here also, there were 2 Geshemas from Domaling, 4 nuns from Domaling came. More would have come, but it was during the exam season. So in this question, what can each of us do to support the continued existence of a lineage in the world? It's one of Venerable Damcho's questions. I can't remember this nun's name, but she was so wise. She was talking about in supporting our community. She said, as senior nuns, our job is to actually really love and support our junior nuns and respect them. And then she said, as junior nuns, your job is to really support and respect and love your senior nuns. She said, that's how we'll go forward with the lineage. Because there had been a little bit of back and forth about, I'm a senior, the juniors never listened to me. And then the juniors were like the senior, especially on the Vietnamese. The seniors tell me things and I don't want to do them. So any opportunity that people had to address issues that had come up, they used this time when they stood up to really share some beautiful, beautiful wisdom. So there was a lot there. I love this photo just because it shows how hot it was and how people would do anything to stay happy. And, it worked. It worked. This is one of the nuns from Samtenling, which is a Kagyu nunnery. Also, sometimes there would be surprises in the schedule. Like we didn't find out until the morning that it was Independence Day and that Indian Independence Day, and the whole program had to be scrapped for the day. But everybody came out to the front, and all those who were Indian by birth stood in the front and sang the national anthem and held the flag. And it was a beautiful celebration. And, then saying goodbye to Venerable Damcho was the last slide here. But this is the one of the Taiwanese nuns that Rinpoche brought. She's a longtime student of his. She's lived in India for a very long time, but he was so concerned that people stay healthy that he wanted the Westerners and the Vietnamese not to have to eat the Himalayan food. He wanted the Himalayans to eat their regular diet, but he wanted to make sure that Vietnamese and the others, the 5 others, had food that was good for us. So she looked market after market. She was always looking for fresh vegetables. She had friends from Taiwan who were sending tofu because there was no such thing there. So much effort was made to make sure that this was a good environment for people to do what Master Guo Guang had said. Watch your mind, do your practice. The program was laid out to follow 3 sections. The first one was sila, precepts, ethics. So that whole section was on teaching the precepts, which was very, very important to have done, especially for those new Bhikshunis, had not gotten full teachings on those precepts, and we hope to be able to help that continue. So that's where Venerable Damcho and Venerable Guo Guang traded off every few days, teaching on those. That period ended just as I was leaving, and now they have probably finished today a course on concentration based on the Anapanasati Sutra. Chetsang Rinpoche has developed a way of teaching concentration meditation, which is more suited to modern times, he says. I'm sorry, I missed it, actually, but Kenmo Drolma was teaching that for this time. And it was interesting just because of the variety of practices, right? I mean, the Bhutanese nuns told me their schedule is intense. They are up early in the morning, they do chanting and prayers in the morning, they do breakfast, they go study, they have another study period, they have lunch, they have absolutely no break. They go, then they have an hour of debate practice, they have an hour of English every day, they go back to doing more study in the evening, but they don't do any meditation. So for them, the fact that we were doing meditation practice every morning and every night and doing walking meditation, they're like, what do I do? I have no idea. So this week will be especially beneficial for them. On the other hand, for the Vietnamese, doing walking meditation is what they do, as you can see from our own Vietnamese nun here. So they were able to lead the walking meditation that we did every night as the first part of our service. Every night we did walking meditation as a group, and then people went off and did their own practices for the rest of the evening. So again, this sort of cross-cultural, cross-tradition exchange was so very rich. And as time went on and people got more comfortable with each other, that even without being able to speak each other's languages, we began to learn more. And it's not something that any of us has not experienced, that we've ever been out with monastics. But again, to be in a group of 130 nuns with all these differences, knowing that the Dharma and nuns' aspiration, and I'm speaking of nuns because that's who I was with, the aspiration to practice, to transform their minds, to get out of samsara, that was the binding force that no one doubted in anyone. So that connecting tissue of having made this commitment to the Dharma and living in the Dharma is just a very, very powerful. Again, I was so inspired. So many stories to tell. You know, I heard stories from many of the Himalayan nuns, especially, about how just from early on in childhood, they knew they wanted to ordain. Their families across the board were not happy about it. Some of them just flat ran away, 13, 14 years old. It's like, okay, they won't let me, I'm gone. For others, they did some negotiating things. One nun told me her family was well educated, she was well educated, and they wanted her to stay in school. And they didn't want her to ordain. They didn't want her to ordain. And finally, she said, "Okay, you don't want me to ordain, that's fine, but I'm not going to school anymore either." And after she held out on that one for a while, they said, "Well, if you're not going to go to school, you may as well go to the nunnery." Off she went. So it's not a guarantee that there is that support. But when people have that aspiration and it's strong, they couldn't be stopped. And I found that very inspiring. So just a little bit to share about how rich it was and how precious it was to be able to bring the Abbey. Because I said before I left, I feel like all of us were there. Everything that we have learned was there. Everything that we have been able to, to gather as a monastic presence was a part of what we could share and then be a part of again. So I'm just so grateful to all of us, all of that experience, certainly to Venerable Children, to all the people who have supported us and continue to make this happen. And for everyone in the world, all the lamas who are supporting those nuns, there's so much, especially in Nepal and Bhutan, so much energy to give, make sure the nuns have what they need. And it's also true in the Tibetan tradition. The reason the Dolmanines couldn't come is that they were all at the debates or studying for the debates, right? So nuns have moved forward so much in recent times.